Hello, this is Professor Kyle Mack, and you are watching 13-2 Lesson Intro in 5 minutes or less. So the first thing that we're going to look at is reflections. And we're going to look at the basic concepts of reflections, reflections in coordinate geometry, and then finally we're going to look at something called the law of reflection. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at glide reflections. Glide reflections are a special type of a succession of transformations, so we'll talk about that a little bit. All right, so first we're going to look at reflections. And the basic concepts of reflections really comes down to two main things. There's both equidistance and there is opposite directionality when it comes to a reflection. So just like these other transformations that we've looked at, we're going to have a pre-image and then we're going to have an image. Now, the image actually has a special name to it. We call it a virtual image. That's because reflections occur in mirrors. So we're going to talk about light in a little bit here and how that works. But really what's happening is when you look at that, you're not seeing a perfect exact copy. You're seeing a virtual image that appears to be behind the mirror but really isn't and doesn't have the same orientation. It's a flipped orientation. So let's go ahead and model that first with this diagram at the bottom left-hand corner. So if you look at B, if you were to reflect B, it would be somewhere over here. And you would make sure that B was equally far away from line M. But what you will see here is that when you do that, you actually create a different orientation for the triangle. It's a flipped orientation. And if we look at this dot paper diagram, we'll see that this example with line M, we see that the same thing happens here. We have A and A prime are equally far away from line M, but they create a different orientation. All right, the other thing that we can do is we can look at reflections in coordinate geometry. There are some certain lines of symmetry that actually create predictable patterns. Those lines are when the line of reflection is over Y, when the line of reflection is over the x-axis, or when the line of reflection is y equals x, when you put that equation into slope-intercept form. So as you can see, the pre-image A and the virtual image A prime have a really weird relationship where x becomes y and y becomes x. So you see 1 now goes from the x value to the y value, and 4 goes from being the y value to now the x value. So that's just a really cool thing that happens with lines of reflection when you have that as y equals x. And then the same, there are patterns that can occur with when the y-axis is your line of symmetry and when the x-axis is your line of reflection. All right, the next thing that we can do is we also see lines. When lines are reflected, if the line is parallel to the line of reflection, then you're actually going to create another parallel line on the other side. And we're actually going to look at how to perform reflections of lines in various ways, but it's very similar to what we've already looked at. You perform the reflection over 2 points given, or that you find within that line, and then you find the slope and the y-intercept of the new line after you perform the reflection. Then our last thing that we're going to look at when it comes to reflections is how light reflects. So when light reflects off of a smooth surface, there is a predictable pattern. And that predictable pattern is shown here in the right-hand side here, the top right-hand corner. And the law of reflection states that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. And so there's equality because of the fact that reflection is an isometry. And so we'll do a little bit of examination with that, but not a whole lot. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is glide reflections. Glide reflection is a translation and then a reflection. And really, it doesn't matter what order, but basically what's going to happen is there's going to be a reflection and a translation that occurs. And so if I take this object down at the bottom and I translate it downward and then I reflect it over this line, what I get is an image that underwent a glide reflection. Tessellations can be created using glide reflections. Tessellations are just really cool patterns where we fit objects together like puzzle pieces. And then any combination of multiple transformations is called a succession. So a glide reflection is technically a very simple type of succession of transformations. That concludes your lesson intro.